Since before recorded history, within the native stories of American tribes to modern-day anthropologists, people have searched for a legend. Folk tales handed down through generations tell of a huge hairy beast that roams the wilderness of North America.
Long before white men arrived in the Americas, this creature was already a legend. Modern-day researchers have continued the quest for this elusive being. In 1958, bulldozer operator Jerry Crew made plaster casts of huge footprints. The story became national news, and the term Bigfoot was coined. Now, soon the legend of Sasquatch and the modern term Bigfoot would merge, describing a single creature. And those who search for this creature are called Sasquatch hunters. Stories have been told throughout recorded history of hairy man-like creatures throughout the world. Now, only recently have many of these claims been investigated and studied. Bigfoot researcher is a term used to describe people who have a keen interest in the subject and the aptitude to go out and search for scientific answers to the phenomenon. In North America, several diligent researchers are pursuing the subject for scientific scrutiny. Now, among those are Stan Gordon, Eric Altman, Steve Kulls, Ted Cassidy, and Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so as a youngster I was familiar with the stories about Bigfoot. I actually saw the Patterson-Gimlin film at the Spokane Coliseum with my brother and my dad. And one thing sort of led to another. It steeled my interests that were already budding in natural history and primate and human evolution. And so the prospect of there being this, maybe a missing link or some primitive form of human out in the wilds of the Northwest was a fascinating prospect for a young mind.
My interest in Bigfoot began in 1980 when I was 10 years old, and mainly in part because of two documentary films that I saw, one being The Legend of Boggy Creek, which was more of a docudrama, not necessarily a factual movie, but a movie based on some of the things that occurred in Fouke, Arkansas, some of the sightings they were reporting. The other was actually more of a fictional movie than a documentary, but again, in that area, northern Texas, eastern Louisiana, Arkansas, that area there, was a movie called The Creature from Black Lake, and it was a fictional movie about two college students who went down to a make-believe city called Oil City to investigate the legends of the creature, the Sasquatch creature, Bigfoot creature down there. They were hoping to capture it and bring it back. And those two movies really got me started in the Bigfoot phenomenon.
I think the driving force behind me going after Sasquatch or Bigfoot is twofold. Really, it's my own curiosity. I've always been curious to mysteries of the world. And the fact that when I went into this, I was quite skeptical that eventually I would talk to people and it would turn out to be nothing. And I found it to be the contrary. The second part is that I want to vindicate the witnesses, and I want to vindicate the folks that think I'm nuts for even believing in such a thing.
I wasn't really into Bigfooting per se until I saw Mysterious America, the movie, and that was the first time I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, and it was on the big screen, 20 feet tall. And a cold shock went up my back, and this thrill of excitement went through my body, and I've been hooked ever since.
You know, I started doing this many, many years ago, and I've been doing this now, it'll be 52 years very soon. I started when I was 10 years old. In all the years I've been doing, I've never seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. Talked to thousands of witnesses, seen various physical evidence, so I'm convinced there's some phenomena out there we cannot easily dismiss, something we have yet to find a scientific explanation for, after you eliminate all the things we can explain away. But I guess from the calls I've been taking calls from the public since 1969. And I get many reports by way of email and through my hotline still on all kinds of strange phenomena across Pennsylvania. And I guess you hope it's that next phone call that's going to give it that lead that might solve the mystery after so many years.
Often the people who pursue Sasquatch are eyewitnesses themselves, having had an encounter of their own. In most cases, they were skeptics until they witnessed the creature up close.
Probably the most, I'd say, exciting Bigfoot encounter occurred in October of 2008 at Salt Fork State Park in southeastern Ohio. Myself and another investigator were out just looking for other researchers that night. Weren't intending to do field research, weren't intending to collect any evidence or have any experiences, just looking for the other researchers. And we came to a picnic area. There had been sightings at this picnic area. And in that picnic area, we had rocks thrown at us. We heard something large moving through the brush. We returned to that picnic area later in the night, about 4:30 in the morning, and I actually saw a figure, I don't know exactly what it was, some kind of large figure rise up from behind a 4-foot tall brush, real thick briars and brush. And I can't say exactly what it was, but it did appear to have the shape of a human, although a very large human, massive shoulders, a conical bullet type head to it, and it was just all dark. I couldn't see any features, I couldn't see its face. My high beams actually went across the front of this figure as I was backing out of the parking lot. I did catch a white bluish eye shine, just for a split second. When I pulled the car back in and put the high beams on the bush and jumped out with the spotlight to confirm what I'd seen, whatever was there was gone.
We went into the area where the witness had seen the creature, me and T. Lancaster. We wasn't in the woods long before my two youngest sons started radioing us on our next telephones, telling us that they had seen a creature. They stood there and watched it for about 5 minutes. The older of the two, which is the braver of the two, decided he was going to move in closer. He said when he made motion towards the creature, he said the creature in turn did the same and moved closer to him, to the point where they were about 80 feet from each other. They stood there and looked at it for about 3 to 5 minutes. The creature took off down a hill after I guess it got uncomfortable. And it was right about the same time period that I had seen something out of my right side peripheral vision. And then I became overcome by something that I haven't ever been able to explain. At the time I was in the woods, T. Lancaster had already left me to go to the kids since they were having the sighting. He had left the woods, left me there alone. And at the point in time when I had just seen that, that's when I went into what I explain as a breakdown, or I laid down on the ground, felt really ill, very unusual feeling, nothing like I'd ever felt before. And then soon after that, it probably lasted maybe a couple minutes, and I was fine. I got up and I walked out of the woods. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. It's the first time, it's the last time, hopefully, because that was a strange feeling. But I think that's the closest I ever come to an actual encounter. Whatever it was, something had an effect on me.
My first encounter actually was in Texas, and I was using a thermal seeker, and it hit something within these reeds. And what happened is I pulled out some night vision, and whatever it was standing there in the reeds, which were 6 feet tall, and it was watching another researcher, you know, kind of cutting brush. And it ducked right back down, and then it came back up. But it was always keeping its eye on that researcher, and that researcher, when he turned into it, it just kind of turned and boom, whoosh, and you heard this big whooshing noise, and it disappeared. And there was a big swath of the reeds that had been just plowed down, and that was really my first encounter.
Researchers who have not had a personal encounter are nevertheless drawn to the study by intriguing physical evidence and eyewitness testimony.
In all the years I've been doing this, and it'll be 52 years next week, I've interviewed thousands of people. Again, I've seen much evidence. I have never personally seen a UFO or a Bigfoot, even though I believe in some cases during the 70s, I was probably pretty close to the creature, but never saw anything.
What I find to be most interesting is when I know that there is a witness who is truthful and honest, there's usually some little nuance, some little twist to the story that they're telling at the moment that didn't occur in the previous one and probably won't occur down the road. Or if it did, there's still a little variance to it. So that gets me going. The fact that, oh, this one said that the creature reached up and pulled its right earlobe, or something to that effect. Something that was intriguing enough for them to remember and relay that little bit of data to me. Makes it believable.
Well, eyewitness sightings are, you're always at the mercy of the credibility of the individual, and then their powers of observation and their ability to interpret the things that they observe. So eyewitness testimony alone is not going to make the ultimate case, in my opinion. It certainly is indicative that there's something that is common to the human experience in this regard, but it is often a very subjective sort of evidence. The trace and physical evidence of footprints of hair, scat, and ultimately DNA will be much more telling.
So far, the best evidence for the existence of Sasquatch is a film shot by Roger Patterson in 1967. This film stands today as a cornerstone of Bigfoot research and is often held as the iconic and irrefutable proof for the creature.
The film, you know, and seeing some of the work that's been done on the film by various different people, there's just things in that film that, you know, even some of the movie producers and film experts will agree that just could not be reproduced during that time, you know, back in the 60s. There's just no way to make a suit do some of the things that supposed suit does. And we know Hollywood can do some amazing things now, but not during that time. I don't think it was possible. So in that fact, it's just the analysis work that's been done to the film, the fact that I've talked to Bob Gimlin personally about the subject. I'm convinced that the film is real.
Well, I'm not sure if the Patterson-Gimlin film is real, if it is a real Bigfoot in it or not. There's so many questions that I have and that keep rising up as the film continues to be studied. I think it's definitely something. I don't know if it's a Bigfoot creature or what exactly it is, but I don't think it's a person in a suit. And if it is, it's a very well-contrived hoax. But at this point, I don't know what a Bigfoot really looks like, except for what the witnesses tell me. I've never seen one myself. I'm probably about 75–80% convinced that it is a real creature in that video. But again, there's a lot of questions that I still don't have the answers for and still trying to find out. I don't think, though, we'll ever have an answer conclusively as to what the PG film is.
Well, the Patterson-Gimlin film still stands as the most compelling piece of photographic evidence. And even just on the basis of the footprints associated with that film site alone, I'm quite convinced of its credibility, that it is in fact genuine. Combine that, the dynamics that are evident and the anatomy, the very consistent anatomy, with the anatomy of the figure in the film itself, and you have a remarkably difficult time before you to suggest that that's hoaxed. I mean, there's no one that I know that has the skills and the wherewithal to speak authoritatively who can look at that and say, oh, it's just a man in a fur suit. Invariably, if they're presented with a man in a fur suit, even a very good one, the distinctions are all too obvious, even to the casual observer. So it has there are still some lingering questions here and there, but that's history. I mean, we could raise such questions about any historical event that's happened in the past that we can't immediately relive and revisit on a first-hand basis. So those things don't concern me so much as what's on the film itself, and that bears up under scrutiny. I don't care about unduly about the character of the filmmaker or where the film was processed or what camera was used. In the end, you have to account for what's on the film celluloid, and that says it all for me.
As far as evidence goes, many say they will accept nothing less than the corpse of a Bigfoot. Others are searching for remains, such as DNA evidence, hair samples, and other byproducts of the creature to serve as proof.
You know, people get confused a lot of times at what direct evidence is versus physical evidence versus circumstantial evidence. You know, a lot of people think that witness testimony is just not evidence. Witness testimony actually is direct evidence. It's the purest form of evidence you can have. It's accepted in a court of law. The next set of evidence you have is physical evidence. Now, physical evidence would constitute something like a fingerprint that can be matched back to something, a footprint that can be matched back to something. So plaster casts, especially those with dermal ridges authenticated by a forensic expert like, Jimmy Chilcutt, that's physical evidence. The funny thing is hair samples kind of fall in the middle of that, because somebody sees it, they collect a hair sample, it comes back to an unknown species. Okay, that very well could be. But technically, hair samples and DNA samples, by definition, at least in the court of law, are all circumstantial. Now, in our particular case, it may not be, because we're just looking to prove that something exists out here that doesn't. Now, if science doesn't want to, and this is my jilt about, what's it going to take to prove Bigfoot? Because science used to accept plaster cast of footprints. They did in the case of the Billy Ape, but they're not in the case of Bigfoot.
Probably casts will get me excited because I know then that they've been through an area. Secondly, of course, DNA, but DNA has nothing really to back itself up with because it has no common denominator as to where to go if it's not a creature that's ever been discovered before. Likewise, hair falls into that basically same category.
I would say scat would be great to get a urine sample. We could learn so much from that. Would be right up there along with DNA. DNA may tell us what speciation, but it's not telling us anything about its lifestyle. And so getting an idea how it lives and being able to use that to learn more about it is probably more precious than anything else we can do.
Now we have DNA. Are they going to pull the same, magic act and say, well, we're not going to accept that. We still need a body. We need to see where that comes from. Well, obviously, if there's something that's new that's not there before that has to be recatalogued, that should tell them that, hey, but will it? I don't know yet.
However, many scientists are reluctant to look at this evidence. After all, their reputations and careers are on the line whenever they speak out about any subject, especially a subject that regards what is often thought of as a mythical creature.
Well, science is historically and traditionally a very conservative endeavor. And as such, individuals who are interested in furthering their career or securing their position in a university often will go with subjects or research questions, oftentimes already knowing what the answer is going to be, or the outcome of their experiments. So, that's not the case in all instances. Clearly there still is some exploration, but I must say that the spirit of exploration is somewhat dampened by that ultra-conservatism. And so I think that that it's important that we continue to ask questions, and sometimes uncomfortable questions that challenge existing paradigms and challenge our sense of what we think we know and what we may not know.
I think that stuff will prove it in a court of law, much like inconclusive evidence or circumstantial evidence will in a court of law get somebody convicted. But the scientific community want a body or part of a body to study and match what we have with it. I think if we come up with that, then they'll start to take it a little seriously. Fortunately for us right now, we do have some scientists who are looking into the phenomenon and taking it more seriously than others do. They won't acknowledge or support the possibility of the creature being out there. They won't come forward and say that there's something out there, except for maybe one or two of them. But they're at least acknowledging that the subject needs studied further and needs looked into.
Sasquatch hunters are not only searching for the beast itself. Every creature in the forest leaves signs of its passing, and Bigfoot is no different. Footprints are the most common evidence, and occasionally hair samples are found, but without something to compare the sample to, there's little that can be gained from it.
Probably the footprints and the hairs that we discovered. Those are the two things I think are the most conclusive to us right now. Do we know Bigfoot made them? No, but they really lean in that direction as something larger than a human left the tracks. And the hair is very intriguing. We haven't had it studied yet, but we're in the process. And once we know it's what it is, that we can rule out common wildlife or whatever, I think that'd be a pretty good piece of evidence.
Best and only evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that I've ever found is a footprint. Well, actually a series of footprints, and I casted the one, and that's the one that I have here at the conference. That's really the only real physical evidence. Other than that, I have nothing whatsoever that I have collected that would, convince me for certain. I'm kind of one of those people where I just have to see it. I haven't had that luxury, unfortunately. I'm envious of my two sons who did, on our very first investigation that we had. You get aggravated, We spend hours upon hours and hours in the woods, at night, listening, looking. A lot of people think that, they watch the TV shows and they think that there's always something going on. I'm telling you, you spend countless of hundreds of hours in the woods and never see or hear a thing. It sometimes can be very frustrating.
Whenever you have a potential scientific breakthrough as important as the discovery of a new hominid, you're sure to have hoaxes. Now, people love to play dress up, and what's more fun than trying to convince someone that they've seen Sasquatch? But seriously, hoaxes are encountered more often than the creature itself, and just as much diligent research has to be applied to a hoax as it would to an actual encounter.
Well, hoaxes create a dimension to this research that others don't necessarily have to contend with, pursuing more orthodox questions. And it complicates and muddies the water a bit, but I think that the bulk of the evidence certainly is above reproach, and on its own merits makes a compelling case that there is a creature, a species that's unrecognized. I think by exposing hoaxes, by demonstrating that as interested academics, we don't just glom onto anything because of some belief or some desire that this be demonstrated to be true and authentic. I think that helps to raise credibility, and it sharpens one's discriminative and skills and critical thinking about the subject matter by winnowing out the chaff.
When I get involved with a witness and I can see through them and it's a hoax, it's like, why did I waste the time? But you really have to look at it level-headedly in order to understand and discern whether or not these people are telling the truth. And I hate to put it in a category like, the teenagers give us a call at night and they're trying to put us on, or it's maybe a member of some sort of group and they're trying to gain some fame or popularity for a while. Believe me, we're not going to bring it to light. We're not going to bring it to the press. We're not going to expose it to the media. I don't care how true or how hoaxing it may be. We usually, as a group, keep an investigation to ourselves and not going to release the information to the outsiders.
My litmus test is that I go through a series of checks and balances. When I get a report, I read the report over. I call them up. I speak to them on the phone to see if it matches their actual report. I may ask them for a more detailed report. Again, I turn around and I do a face-to-face interview if everything is matching the litmus test. And that kind of tells me right then and there. Now, as my background, I was a forensic interviewer, and one of the things I've been extensively trained to do is, when a face-to-face interview, is determine deceit, whether or not somebody is lying to me, either by the words they choose to use or by their body positioning. So that also helps me. That's a tool that I've developed and I've had training about. So it really helps me determining whether or not somebody's telling me the truth or not.
Trying, the best thing is, and we did for years, is try to get out there to the event soon after it occurred And so in some cases, you can see the physical evidence. In a lot of the Bigfoot cases, especially in the 70s, we were there within minutes to hours after they occurred. You saw the emotional reactions of the people. People who were scared to death. Some people, in some cases, actually moved out of their homes temporarily because they were so frightened. What was most convincing, and the best evidence I've seen, was how the animals reacted. That could not have been fabricated. When these creatures were at a distance, dogs, for example, would just carry on and carry on, but when they were close by, while you saw the effects from different types of animals, horses and cattle and cats and whatever, but the dogs were most prominent, especially normally ferocious dogs. When these things were close by, these dogs were like paralyzed. They would not bark, they wouldn't move, they would shake, they would hide in shelters. Sometimes they wouldn't even eat right for 2 or 3 days later. Very, very common in a lot of the cases we looked into.
The bottom line is that each case is a little bit different, and the majority of people that hoax things are generally because of more psychological reasons. And if not psychological reasons, usually it's joke reasons. The people I try to go after are the people that are trying to profit off of it and gain notoriety off of it illegitimately.
Many believe Sasquatch may not be of this world. Because it's so elusive and has never been clearly photographed, nor has one been captured, some have concluded the beast has special powers and can disappear or move into an alternate dimension. Is this possible, or is this simply a way to justify Bigfoot's rarity?
Well, the question of what Bigfoot is it remains a perplexing one. I mean, my null hypothesis, my working hypothesis, based on the evidence that I have encountered, by far the majority of the evidence I've encountered, suggests that it's a great ape. And by that I mean it's more closely allied with the other existing great apes, part of an extensive radiation of which chimps, orangs, and gorillas are just the fleeting remnants of these relic populations in tropical refugia that are on the verge of extinction. Much earlier in geologic time, the ape radiation was much more diverse, much broader, and included the temperate zones of Europe and Southern Asia, and had contained a great diversity in body size and in diet and locomotor habits, and included a primate that was gigantic, Gigantopithecus, it achieved dimensions that makes it the right size in the right place at the right time to be a likely ancestor of the Sasquatch. Well, there are many who argue that these creatures are much more intelligent and much more human than that. And there are some bits of evidence. The possibility of hybridization exists, but the only accounts for which I've had any taken seriously at all describe a hybrid offspring that was unhealthy, was sickly, and died very young, suggesting that there were chromosomal aberrations and anomalies that prevented a viable offspring to be produced. That suggests some distance. I mean, it's fairly close, but some distance. At least there was the potential of creating a fertilized egg and an infant that grew to some degree of maturation.
Again, I think it's either an undiscovered North American primate that has probably existed here long before we settled on this continent, or it's some type of an ancient human of some sort, whether we want to push forward and say Neanderthal, or if we want to say some other type of ancient human species. That's where I steer. I try to stay away from the paranormal because, a lot of people say it may be an alien or it may be some spiritual thing. I think it's a living, breathing being, whatever it is. It's real. It's not. It's leaving footprints. It's physical. So I think we have whatever it is. It's a living, breathing being.
But everything else, all the things that we equate with humanity from its earliest appearance with the genus Homo 2.5 million years ago, tool use, and eventually things like fire, home base, complex social structure, and language. All those things really are essentially devoid, or absent rather. The Sasquatch is devoid of those things, and instead the anatomies and behaviors fall either comfortably within the scope of variation or pretty pretty closely allied with great apes in terms of their behavior and anatomy.
I don't think they're human. They're primate. I think that they're related to all primates, including us. I do not want to place it in apes. I will not place it in hominids until I see an actual skeleton, because nature replicates and copies itself, and aspects of convergent evolution, if it's a good thing that works in nature, it's more than likely some species that adapts and does the same thing. For example, ichthyosaurs, a reptile that swam in the ocean, dolphins, which swim in the ocean, and sharks. They're all fish eaters. They all have dorsal fins. They lived at different times. They're all sleek like a torpedo and very smooth skin, but they all filled the same niche. They all swam very similarly and lived similar lifestyles in similar areas at similar different times in life, but they all adapted and evolved differently. There's nothing to say that Bigfoot's ancestor, created bipedalism on its own, like our ancestors adapted and evolved bipedalism on their own.
So as we're going to these Bigfoot reports, some odd things began to show up. For example, we'd have cases where there was a series of footprints which would just suddenly stop and vanish. And then as all these Bigfoot reports are occurring, very interesting, a lot of them are daylight, a lot of close range sightings, sometimes more than one creature, assuming there's some type of unknown primate. And then the reports began to come in of UFOs and Bigfoot being seen together at the same time and place. And that's what got very, very intriguing.
Honestly, I don't know. When I first started, I thought it had to be an undiscovered primate. I mean, there was a lot of reports coming in that described it like a big gorilla or big monkey or ape. So I was leaning towards that. And as I've gotten further into this and heard different reports saying it looks more human, it has more human-like features, facial features. It does things more along the human traits than a primate. Then I started wondering, well, maybe it's a relic hominid, something like a Neanderthal, a Paranthropus, something along our evolutionary chain. And then I started hearing these reports of all this paranormal stuff going on. Maybe it's a shapeshifter, maybe it's an interdimensional being, maybe it's from a UFO, maybe it's an alien, what they call it, ultra-terrestrial. We don't have any proof to prove what this thing is one way or the other, so I try to remain open-minded. I don't think it's undiscovered primate, but I do think it's an animal, flesh and blood of this earth that we can capture good audio recordings, footprint castings, make footprint castings, collect hair, and hopefully blood or tissue samples. It's far-fetched for me to think that this creature has the ability to disappear on will or go into another dimension or come down from a UFO, but we don't know everything there is to know in this world. And there's a lot of things still unexplained, so you can't rule that possibility out. I think as a good objective researcher, you have to look into every avenue, whether you agree with it or disagree with it.
Sasquatch hunters use a variety of tools to search for the beast. Special cameras, listening devices, even police-type thermal imaging systems. But how useful are these tools, and have they worked to bring in evidence of Bigfoot?
Well, some of the equipment I use in the field, some of the most important equipment I use is the digital recorders. And we network out in the areas, and we put out digital recorders, and that collects our audio. So there's some audio backup of if we hear footsteps, we're going to capture them. If we hear noises, we're going to capture them. Very crucial piece of equipment. Not necessarily for anything concrete evidence. I guess a lot of my missions aren't so much to gather concrete physical evidence so we can say, hey, see, we've proven Bigfoot. My evidence is gathered more from my knowledge base of how they behave and what they do and how they act. Some of the other things we're going to start to employ is the use of a DVR system using night vision cameras, and we can live-time monitor and record them at the same time. So we'll be able to perhaps set up technology snares, and perhaps these creatures will draw into them. There's a couple other little things I use. I use a high-end digital recorder. It's got 4 mics on it. You can either be 360 degrees or 120 degrees, depending on how many mics or where the mics I want to use are. And it's stereo quality. It records in stereo, and the sound quality is far superior to anything that I've ever heard. And we believe it or not, we believe we may have caught an infrasonic burst on one of the cameras, or on one of the recorders. And because I've spec'd it out, and it was under 2,000 kilohertz. which is well out of the audible range of a human being. So, you know, we're in the process of finding somebody to analyze that, some kind of bioacoustics lab that will actually analyze it and tell us if legitimately that, that was infrasound you caught or not. But we know we never heard any of that. But it's kind of funny because you hear this low-pitched, really growl like I've never heard before, and just preceding that you hear some footsteps. So these audio equipment, pieces of equipment are so quintessential in what we do. I use some personal equipment. Of course, I use night vision, which is, you know, it's garnered me some sightings in the past. So that becomes, you know, really good seeing these creatures because they are nocturnal primarily. And I use a heat seeker device, which basically, if I'm in complete darkness, I can fan this out. And if it hits anything with body heat, it registers, and I know there's something there, you know, from where I'm standing to 217 yards. And then I can also laser point it, so I can determine whether or not, you know, where the laser point breaks, I know that's how, you know, distance-wise that's where it is. So there's just a couple other pieces of equipment that I feel are really essential to my job. You know, of course, there's the safety equipment. You know, you always got to carry a good knife. I always carry a Zippo. I always carry an emergency blanket packed away somewhere, and I always carry a compass manual, and I also carry a handheld GPS. And those are essential pieces of equipment too. Everybody should have at least a compass, a knife, and a good lighter, because that is going to keep you warm. It's going to keep you in direction of where you want to go, and it's going to keep you at least somewhat protected.
I think that the first thing would be their noodle. I always encourage amateurs to not get overly caught up in the expectation of finding evidence, but rather become very familiar with their own neck of the woods, their immediately accessible region where they're going to be spending their time, and then spend time there. Get familiar with the lay of the land. Where are the resources? You know, where are the berries? Where are other fruiting trees? You know, where are the animals sheltering? You know, what are the habits of the other commonly known wildlife that are much more observable, and gain a better understanding of the nature of the ecosystem. What are the plants and other resources that might be available to a Sasquatch that would allow it to make a living in that habitat, and then just enjoy that and get used to that and become a good observer of nature. Understand animal sign and footprints so that you can objectively interpret that kind of evidence, and all of that will make your experience much more gratifying. You know, I've always raised a cautionary note with individuals who go out, you know, these weekend warriors who consistently have some kind of contact. You know, they rap on a tree and they get a response, or they give a whoop and they get a response, and they describe these experiences. And you know, I've sometimes said, well, that's impressive that you're able to so consistently observe and make contact with or feel that you're close to this very rare and elusive animal, you know, that I've been looking for a couple decades now. Why don't you demonstrate your skills in another way? And I challenge them to go out and bring me back a photograph of a calendar style photograph of a deer, or an elk, or a moose, or a raccoon. And these are animals that are much more common, much easier to observe in the wild. And if they're unable to do that, then I hope that causes them to pause and reflect upon the claims that they're making, the assertions they're making about their consistent and repeated contacts with this very rare and elusive animal.
Well, some of the more common tools I would suggest is common sense. You know, using good judgment in the field, your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose. You can tell a lot from an area if you just let your senses work. You can see things that you might have not have picked up originally, or hear things, smell things. Those are basic tools that anybody can use. And of course, the common sense and logic. Try to be objective in ruling out, you know, you want to prove it's a Bigfoot, rule everything out, you know, and eliminate that stuff. As far as electronical tools, or electronic equipment, recording equipment, I carry a digital video recorder. I carry a 35mm and a digital camera. It's best to have both the negatives available so people can look and see it's not tampered with. I carry a Zoom Q3 digital recorder, audio recorder, and that's proven pretty well for me so far. Measuring tape, Binoculars help, and just some rudimentary things. You don't have to go full force out there and get every expensive toy there is. Some you'll never even use. I have a FLIR that I take with me, a handheld forward-looking infrared camera, and I use it, but I haven't had much success with it. Hopefully I will someday, but it's a tool that helps me see in the dark, see heat signatures in the dark, and know that there's something there. And something I learned from another researcher is that it's a great way to debunk things. If someone claims they see a creature by a tree at night, you can look at that tree and see if there's a heat source left on that tree, if the creature was leaning against it. Or if the witness says that creature walked across the field to the left, you can go look at the field, and if that creature just did it, you can see the heat signature and the footprints that it left. And that confirms or, wipes out that possibility. So the FLIRs, I think, is a great tool to have, and it's going to be a beneficial tool for a lot of researchers. Unfortunately, it's just pretty expensive right now, and hopefully one day it'll come down to price where everyone can utilize it.
The modern-day search for Bigfoot began in the 1950s. So why haven't we been able to capture or document a creature so far? What is the secret of Sasquatch? And why hasn't man been able to get close to one?
The question's been posed, why hasn't a body been found? I'm not so sure one hasn't been found. Don't ask me why, don't ask me how. Science overlooks things for years. We talk about the Gigantopithecus. And that was because a few teeth were found in 1934 by von Koenigswald while he was a German scientist while he was in China. And, it took a few years before they realized what that was. So, strong possibility that perhaps a body has been found and it just hasn't been brought out to science, or perhaps science overlooked it and misidentified it. But another good reason is that the forest floor has a natural vacuum cleaner too. I mean, there's been a lot of hunters that I know. I've known a lot of hunters. They've never found a dead bear in the forest. Now, yeah, you may see a bear clipped by a car once in a while in those particular areas, but that was created by man in a vehicle. But in the middle of the forest where the Sasquatch mainly roam, you shouldn't expect to find it any more than you would a bear laying dead. Now, people say, well, I found deer. Well, there's a lot of deer in the population in the United States. I think there's something around, in the millions. Coyote, I found coyote and wolf. Well, their population is up there. Well, but not many people have seen a dead bear. Is it a possibility they bury their dead? Well, that's one theory. I've seen no evidence other than some anecdotal stories that, lack any kind of evidence or proof, but they're just observations. That's the only thing I heard about them burying the dead. But is it a possibility? Entirely possible. Not discounting it. I don't necessarily believe in it, but I'm not discounting it either.
I've asked a question for years myself, as the skeptics do. If there are so many reports throughout the country and around the world, why don't we have more physical evidence? By now, somebody should have hit one with a car. Somebody, I don't recommend shooting it, but somebody should have shot one and brought one in. Somebody should have found a dead one. It's more logical from all the reports. And then when you go back now and look at some of the cases we had, that may be the explanation why, because we may be dealing with something that's not a normal flesh and blood animal, as strange as it sounds.
Most Sasquatch hunters believe that possession of an actual Bigfoot is the only thing that will satiate the naysayers. However, evidence comes in many forms, such as photographs, film, and video of the creature. The internet is saturated with this kind of material, but is it sufficient to prove the existence of Sasquatch?
I personally believe that if we got a really good photo or a really good video, it would help. Now, we do know that there's some existing videos out there. Typically, they're pixelized where you can't see them, or blurry, that kind of thing. People taking them, of course, you get a lot of people talking about the cell phone cameras. And I admit, cell phone videos are not very, they're not very good at focusing and stuff, so I understand that. But I think if we got a really, really good video, and I mean, it would have to be really good, I believe that it would help tremendously. There are trail camera photos in existence that haven't been released to the public. I've personally seen one, and when you look at it, it's one of those photos that looks so perfect that it almost looks like a museum exhibit. Unfortunately, I wish it was a front face view, not a back of the head view, but I guess we have to take what we get. But no, I think photo evidence, video evidence, I think if you get something really good, it's got some really good quality, I think it would help go a long way in the research.
It depends. If they photographed tracks, that might be a good way to see the track as it actually was preserved before the weather deteriorates it or changes it, or the snow melt and become deformed. Tracks can be hoaxed, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, but video photographs of tracks I think are great. If someone finds hair or a destroyed animal in the woods to document it, it's great documentation. Now, photographs and videos of Bigfoot is another story, simply because there's so many costumes made, and then there's so much access to different software programs where they can insert things, manipulate things, add CGI. You can't really rely on films as a bona fide solution to the problem, a piece of evidence. If it's a creature in the film that's doing something that a human couldn't do, like leaping 50 feet forward or lifting up a 500-pound boulder, or picking up a log and throwing it, something like that, then it's worth looking at, because if we can rule out that humans can't lift that log, we run tests on doing that, we can't lift it, and something we watched on the film do that adds a lot more credibility to that video or that piece of photograph, that footage.
Well, we're rapidly coming into an age where film, film is almost non-existent, and so digital medium is potentially subject to all kinds of potential manipulation. And while there are means to determine the veracity of a digital image, I think just given what can be accomplished with CGI, or the things that we see on the movie screen, will render most digital images very suspicious when the claim is extraordinary. And so, and the quality of digital imagery is just not, well, it's getting better as we speak, but it's not as good as the cine film. That's one of the interesting things about the Patterson-Gimlin film, is that was one of the best film stocks that you could possibly have used, with the finest grain and color quality at that time, and for that matter at any time subsequently. So it was a crossing of the stars, a bunch of seemingly serendipitous events that made for a remarkable piece of footage, and one of the reasons why I think it stands as one of the singular pieces of good photographic evidence that we have. But in this age of digital cameras and cell phones and iPads and all sorts of electronic gadgetry which can capture digital information, we're going to keep seeing more and more. The question will be, what bearing will it have? What implications will it have? And I'm afraid it's going to have minimal, quite honestly.
In recent years, Sasquatch hunters have diligently tried to acquire DNA evidence of the creature. After all, DNA is the biological blueprint of a species. But DNA may not be enough to prove the animal exists, and absolute proof is what is needed to catalog a completely new hominid.
Well, ultimately, I think it will be DNA that tips the scales. For me, the footprints and the physical evidence of hair certainly is compelling. It certainly must be considered. But I think a unique DNA sequence corroborated independently by additional laboratories will certainly be something that the scientific community will have to deal with.
Well, I think the only thing that will ever prove the skeptics is if we come up with a body or positive physical evidence, positive DNA testing or something like that. But I think the body is what's going to convince the skeptics. And once again, I keep an open mind to all aspects of the Bigfoot phenomena, even though I'm convinced more and more, because I question more and more, like the skeptics, if there's so many reports, why don't we have a body? And that's why I focused this book, Silent Invasion, on some of the very strange cases we had, which suggested that there may be more to this than a flesh and blood explanation.
In the field of Bigfoot research, there are two schools of thought. One is a no-kill position, where the hunter does not want to harm the animal, just collects sufficient evidence to persuade the public that it does exist. The other is a pro-kill position. These hunters believe nothing short of a body or carcass of the animal will prove its existence. Both sides have their supporters and detractors, and both sides have valid reasons to believe the way they do.
Well, no animal that is documented has ever been proven without submitting either a live body or a corpse of it. You know, so it's going to take one or the other. And I really think that these animals are too smart to be trapped. I think that as far as trying to tranquilize one, if you guess on the low side, you're going to have a groggy, angry animal. If you guess on the high side, then you might kill it anyways. So, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to harvest one of these animals to bring it in. Just based on the sheer number of sightings, we believe that, you know, there are a large number of these animals and that they exist in pocket areas really throughout the world, but you know, there's several pocket areas in the United States too. We're out to prove the existence of them.
I'd shoot one with a tranquilizer pretty darn quickly if I had the option to knock it out and study it and take samples and, you know, prove a lot of possibilities and theories and record it all. And there would be those who would say, well, that recording can be faked, but the detail of the analysis is probably going to be what's going to keep that from happening. But I wouldn't shoot one to kill it specifically just to collect the body. Unfortunately, I've just not been raised to do that.
I've always had the no-kill view of this creature. First of all, I wouldn't want it on my conscience to find out that this is some type of a, you know, human of some sort. I've always been with the view that I could actually lean both ways because I'm kind of 50-50 on the subject as to whether this thing is an undiscovered primate or an undiscovered form of human life of some sort. So I would not be able to do it just based on the fact that I'd be afraid that the thing would be some kind of human.
No, I've been, I wrestled with that question when early on when I began my investigations. I was of the mindset, similar to my predecessor, Dr. Grover Krantz, that the only way the scientific community was going to acknowledge this is if a type specimen were laid at their feet or on the bench, the dissection table. And so I was out to collect a specimen by whatever means. I wrestled with that for quite some time before coming to that conclusion, but was never quite comfortable with it. And eventually I reconsidered, and I thought, well, you know, what is my motivation? I mean, is it to just simply prove my point to someone? And that didn't seem to justify such an approach. And so I did a 180-degree turn, and our objective began to be the collection of DNA by unobtrusive, humane means. And my protocols are screened by our Animal Welfare Committee on campus. They're university sanctioned, and all my field work receives sanction through the proper committees on campus. And because those funds come through the university from donors and granting agencies. So so that's kind of where I'm at, and I it's probably going to happen at some point. Somebody will probably shoot one, or one will eventually get hit on a highway or something like that. But I wouldn't advocate that as a justifiable means to understand this species any better.
Nothing will ever be solved that way. I mean, it will just, it will just constantly be people batting back and forth. Oh, they exist. No, they don't. I mean, with a body to prove they exist, I think that, it's going to rock the world of a lot of people. It's going to vindicate a lot of people who have come forward and said, hey, I saw this thing, I'm not crazy. And then people say, yeah, you are, da da da. you know, and it's just, you know, it's something that's a necessity.
Evidence for the existence of Sasquatch comes in many different forms. Now consider this. What would cause a man to spend money out of his own pocket to pursue something he knows doesn't exist? Sasquatch hunters purchase millions per year in equipment to hunt this monster. FLIR thermal equipment, night vision, scopes and binoculars, game cameras, guns. They get no funding other than their own money to search for Bigfoot. If it's all a hoax, then why would hundreds of eyewitnesses spend their own money on things they have no use for other than Sasquatch hunting? That in itself is a form of proof the creature must exist.
We used a lot of stuff for research also. We used like the bionic ear and night vision and all that. But through process of elimination and over the years, we pretty much figured out that the way to go is like through thermal imaging.
So the most important tools is really a camera, something for scale, tape measures, compass. You know, if you want to use a GPS, that's fine, but I always tell people to take a compass as backup because we all know what happens to powered devices. The batteries go dead, something happens. Make sure you got something that doesn't matter about a battery. Find your way back out in the woods.
So these audio equipment, pieces of equipment are so quintessential in what we do. I use some personal equipment. Of course, I use night vision, which is, you know, it's garnered me some sightings in the past. So that becomes, you know, really good seeing these creatures because they are nocturnal primarily. And I use a heat seeker device, which basically, if I'm in complete darkness, I can fan this out, and if it hits anything with body heat, it registers, and I know there's something there, you know, from where I'm standing to 217 yards.
We use game cameras in the research aspect of it, just, you know, just putting them out to see if anything triggers them.
As a scientist, as a person who works to teach, as an educator, you collect and learn from everything you do.
And so if an amateur were to come up with evidence, I hope that they would, you know, be thoughtful in the way they document it and the way they handle it, and that they bring it to someone's attention. You know, whether it's establishing a relationship with an expert in their immediate vicinity, or whether they were to contact me directly, for example, and make me aware of that kind of evidence. It's important to have others vet and verify and evaluate the evidence, rather than just have it tucked away and then make repeated claims about, you know, well, we collected hair and we found scat. You know, it's hair and it's scat, but you may have no idea what it came from.
Bigfoot research is something of an oxymoron. You can't actually research Bigfoot until you have one, and you can't have one unless you're willing to go into the woods and get one. Now, true, you can research the subject of Sasquatch, the phenomenon of Bigfoot, but without a specimen, you can't actually research the creature itself. And any evidence that you collected, you'd have nothing to compare it to. Now, until the day comes when there is a body available to study, Sasquatch hunters will continue to gather evidence and investigate reports and sightings. And when that day comes, a whole new chapter in the discovery of life will be opened, and all the wonders it brings will be due in no small part to the Sasquatch hunters that search for the creature today.